Question 1. The audit findings indicate that a New Hampshire pistol/revolver license holder, who is legally permitted to possess a handgun, has stored their firearm in a manner that requires review to ensure compliance with state regulations. Considering the potential for unauthorized access, which of the following storage methods best aligns with the requirements of New Hampshire law for preventing access by individuals who are not authorized to possess the firearm? Option A. Storing the handgun in an unlocked drawer in the living room. Option B. Storing the handgun in the locked glove compartment of a vehicle. Option C. Storing the handgun in a locked gun safe that requires a key or combination for access. Option D. Storing the handgun on a bedside table in the owner's bedroom. Correct answer is C. Storing the handgun in a locked gun safe that requires a key or combination for access. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential lapse in adherence to New Hampshire's firearm safety regulations concerning the storage of handguns. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of the legal requirements for preventing unauthorized access to firearms, balancing individual rights with public safety obligations, and interpreting the intent behind the regulations. A failure to correctly implement these requirements could have severe legal and ethical consequences, including criminal liability and a loss of public trust. The correct approach involves ensuring that the handgun is stored in a locked container that is inaccessible to individuals who are not authorized to possess it, such as minors or prohibited persons, as mandated by New Hampshire law. This approach directly addresses the core purpose of the regulations: to prevent accidental shootings, suicides, and the use of firearms in crimes by unauthorized individuals. Specifically, New Hampshire RSA 159-26 outlines requirements for firearm safety devices, emphasizing that firearms must be stored in a manner that prevents access by children. A locked container, such as a gun safe or a lock case, is the most definitive way to meet this requirement, ensuring that only the license holder or another authorized individual with access to the key or combination can retrieve the firearm. Storing the handgun in a locked glove compartment of a vehicle, while seemingly secure, presents a regulatory failure. While it might deter casual access, it does not definitively prevent access by individuals who might gain unauthorized entry to the vehicle, especially if the vehicle is left unattended. New Hampshire law requires a higher standard of security than simply placing it in a compartment that could be compromised. Leaving the handgun on a bedside table, even if the owner is present in the room, is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This method offers no protection against unauthorized access, particularly by children or other individuals who may be present in the home. It directly contravenes the spirit and letter of New Hampshire's firearm safety laws, which are designed to prevent such unsecured storage. Placing the handgun in a drawer in a common area of the home, such as the living room, without any locking mechanism, is also a clear violation. This action creates an unacceptable risk of access by unauthorized individuals, including children or visitors, and fails to meet the legal standard for secure firearm storage in New Hampshire. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes a thorough understanding of the specific New Hampshire statutes and administrative rules governing firearm storage. This involves consulting the relevant sections of RSA 159, particularly those pertaining to firearm safety and licensing. When faced with ambiguity, seeking clarification from the New Hampshire State Police or legal counsel specializing in firearm law is advisable. The decision should always err on the side of maximum safety and compliance with the most stringent interpretation of the law to prevent harm and uphold legal obligations. Question 2. Regulatory review indicates that an applicant for a New Hampshire pistol/revolver license is completing the application form. The applicant was arrested 5 years ago for a misdemeanor offense, but the charges were subsequently dismissed by the court. The application form asks, "Have you ever been arrested?" What is the most appropriate and legally compliant approach for the applicant to take regarding this question? Option A. State no to the question, as the charges were dismissed and there was no conviction. Option B. Only disclose arrests that resulted in a conviction. Option C. Provide a vague answer such as no issues with law enforcement. Option D. Disclose the arrest and the fact that the charges were dismissed. The correct answer is D. Disclose the arrest and the fact that the charges were dismissed. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to navigate the nuanced requirements of New Hampshire's pistol and revolver licensing process, while also adhering to ethical obligations regarding the disclosure of personal information. The challenge lies in balancing the legal mandate to provide truthful information with the potential for past conduct to impact current licensing eligibility, necessitating a careful and accurate representation of facts. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves providing a complete and truthful disclosure of all requested information, including any prior arrests, even if charges were ultimately dismissed or not pursued. New Hampshire law, as reflected in RSA 159(6), requires applicants to provide truthful answers to all questions on the application. This includes disclosing arrests, regardless of the outcome. Failing to disclose a prior arrest, even one that did not result in a conviction, can be considered a false statement on the application, which is a violation of the law and grounds for denial or revocation of a license. Honesty and transparency are paramount in the firearm licensing process to ensure public safety and maintain the integrity of the system. Incorrect approaches analysis. Providing only information about convictions and omitting arrests where charges were dismissed is incorrect because it misrepresents the applicant's history. While a dismissal may mean no conviction, the arrest itself is a matter of public record and is relevant to the licensing authority's assessment of an applicant's suitability. This approach fails to meet the legal requirement for truthful and complete disclosure. Failing to disclose any arrests, regardless of their outcome, is also incorrect. This is a direct violation of the requirement to answer all questions truthfully and completely. The licensing authority is entitled to a full picture of an applicant's interactions with law enforcement. Providing a vague or misleading answer that attempts to circumvent the disclosure requirement, such as stating no convictions without clarifying the arrest history, is also unacceptable. This approach is disingenuous and does not fulfill the applicant's obligation to provide accurate information. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes absolute honesty and full compliance with the letter and spirit of the law. This involves carefully reading each question on the application, understanding the scope of information requested, and providing all relevant details accurately. When in doubt about what information to disclose, it is advisable to err on the side of over-disclosure and consult the relevant New Hampshire statutes or seek guidance from the issuing authority. The goal is to present a complete and truthful application that allows the licensing authority to make an informed decision based on all available facts. Question 3. Performance analysis shows that a New Hampshire resident applying for a pistol/revolver license has indicated on their application that they were convicted of a misdemeanor offense over 15 years ago, but they state they have since maintained a clean record and believe they are eligible. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing authority to ensure compliance with New Hampshire law? Option A. Conduct a thorough background check to verify the nature of the past misdemeanor offense and cross-reference it with the disqualifying offenses listed in New Hampshire Revised Statutes Annotated, RSA 159(3) to determine current eligibility. Option B. Contact the applicant's former employer and 2 personal references to inquire about their character and trustworthiness before making a decision. Option C. Accept the applicant's statement that they have maintained a clean record and consider them eligible, as the offense occurred a significant time ago. Option D. Assume that any misdemeanor conviction older than 10 years is automatically considered eligible for a pistol/revolver license in New Hampshire, regardless of the specific offense. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough background check to verify the nature of the past misdemeanor offense and cross-reference it with the disqualifying offenses listed in New Hampshire Revised Statutes Annotated, RSA 159(3) to determine current eligibility. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to navigate the nuanced requirements of New Hampshire's firearm laws while also considering the ethical implications of their actions. The core challenge lies in accurately interpreting and applying the legal definition of eligible for a pistol/revolver license, especially when faced with information that might seem ambiguous or incomplete. Careful judgment is required to avoid both legal repercussions and ethical missteps. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves diligently verifying all information provided on the application against official records and legal definitions. This approach ensures that the applicant meets all statutory requirements for licensure in New Hampshire. Specifically, it means confirming that the applicant has not been convicted of a disqualifying crime, as defined by New Hampshire Revised Statutes Annotated, RSA 159(3), which outlines the conditions under which a license to carry a pistol or revolver may be issued. This proactive verification is crucial for upholding the integrity of the licensing process and ensuring public safety, aligning with the spirit and letter of New Hampshire law. Incorrect approaches analysis. Relying solely on the applicant's self-attestation without independent verification is a significant regulatory failure. New Hampshire law requires the licensing authority to be satisfied that the applicant is a suitable person to be licensed, which necessitates more than just a declaration. This approach risks issuing a license to an ineligible individual, violating RSA 159(3) and potentially compromising public safety. Assuming that a minor infraction from many years ago would not impact eligibility, without consulting the specific disqualifying offenses listed in RSA 159(3), is another regulatory failure. The statute does not provide for discretionary exceptions for past minor offenses unless explicitly stated. This approach demonstrates a lack of due diligence in understanding the precise legal criteria for disqualification. Contacting the applicant's personal references for an opinion on their character, while potentially useful in some contexts, does not substitute for the legal requirement to verify the absence of disqualifying criminal convictions or other statutory impediments to licensure under RSA 159(3). Character references do not legally confirm eligibility in the manner required by the statute. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role should adopt a systematic approach to application review. This begins with a thorough understanding of the relevant statutes, particularly RSA 159(3), which details the eligibility criteria for a pistol/revolver license in New Hampshire. When reviewing an application, the primary focus must be on verifying factual information against official records. This includes checking for criminal convictions, mental health adjudications, and any other factors explicitly listed as disqualifying. If any information appears ambiguous or potentially disqualifying, the professional must consult official sources or legal counsel to ensure accurate interpretation and application of the law. The decision-making process should prioritize adherence to legal requirements and the protection of public safety above all else. Question 4. The assessment process reveals that an applicant for a pistol/revolver license in New Hampshire is seeking to understand the most critical elements for a successful application beyond simply having no disqualifying criminal convictions. What approach best ensures compliance with New Hampshire's specific firearm licensing regulations? Option A. Assume that a lack of criminal history is the primary determinant for licensing and proceed with the application based on general firearm ownership principles. Option B. Submit an application with minimal personal details, believing that the licensing authority will request further information if needed. Option C. Rely on information about firearm licensing from other states, as the core requirements are likely to be similar across jurisdictions. Option D. Diligently review New Hampshire's RSA 159, ensuring all personal information and required documentation are accurate and complete for the specific license sought. The correct answer is D. Diligently review New Hampshire's RSA 159, ensuring all personal information and required documentation are accurate and complete for the specific license sought. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an applicant to demonstrate not only knowledge of New Hampshire's firearm laws, but also the ability to apply them in a practical, ethical, and responsible manner. The challenge lies in navigating the nuances of legal possession and the responsibilities that accompany it, particularly when dealing with potential legal ambiguities or situations that could be misconstrued. A thorough understanding of the state's specific requirements for pistol and revolver licensing is paramount to avoid legal repercussions and ensure public safety. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves a proactive and thorough understanding of New Hampshire's statutes regarding pistol and revolver licensing. This means diligently reviewing RSA 159, which governs firearms and ammunition, and specifically focusing on the requirements for obtaining a license to carry a pistol or revolver. This includes understanding the application process, the criteria for eligibility, and the responsibilities of a license holder. By ensuring all personal information is accurate and all required documentation is complete and truthful, the applicant demonstrates a commitment to legal compliance and responsible firearm ownership, which is the cornerstone of the licensing process in New Hampshire. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that a clean criminal record automatically satisfies all licensing requirements without verifying specific New Hampshire statutes. While a clean record is a prerequisite, RSA 159 outlines other conditions and procedures that must be met, such as residency requirements and potentially a demonstration of competence, depending on the specific type of license sought. Failing to confirm these specific state mandates constitutes a significant regulatory oversight. Another incorrect approach is to rely on general knowledge of firearm laws from other states or common misconceptions. New Hampshire has its own distinct legal framework for firearm licensing. Misapplying laws from other jurisdictions or relying on hearsay can lead to an incomplete or inaccurate application, potentially resulting in denial or even legal penalties for attempting to obtain a license under false pretenses. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence regarding the specific regulations of New Hampshire. A third incorrect approach is to submit an application with incomplete or vaguely described personal history, believing that minor omissions will not be scrutinized. New Hampshire law, like most jurisdictions, requires full disclosure of all relevant information during the licensing process. Any attempt to obscure or omit details, even if perceived as minor by the applicant, can be interpreted as an attempt to mislead the licensing authority, which is a serious ethical and regulatory violation. Professional reasoning. Professionals seeking a pistol or revolver license in New Hampshire should adopt a systematic approach. First, identify the relevant statutes, RSA 159. Second, thoroughly read and understand each section pertaining to licensing. Third, gather all necessary documentation and ensure its accuracy and completeness. Fourth, if any aspect of the law is unclear, seek clarification from official sources, such as the New Hampshire State Police or legal counsel specializing in firearm law. Finally, approach the application process with honesty and a commitment to full compliance with all legal requirements. Question 5. Stakeholder feedback indicates that some applicants for a pistol/revolver license in New Hampshire are expressing confusion regarding the specific lawful purposes that qualify for licensure. Considering the provisions of New Hampshire Revised Statutes Annotated, RSA, Chapter 159, which of the following approaches best addresses an applicant who states their primary reason for seeking a license is to participate in organized, sanctioned shooting competitions? Option A. Request additional documentation from the applicant to prove they have a history of responsible firearm ownership before considering their application for competitive shooting purposes. Option B. Deny the license because RSA 159 primarily focuses on self-defense as the lawful purpose for pistol/revolver licensure, and competitive shooting is not explicitly mentioned. Option C. Verify that participation in organized, sanctioned shooting competitions is a recognized lawful purpose under RSA 159, and that the applicant meets all other eligibility requirements for licensure. Option D. Automatically approve the license because participation in shooting competitions is a form of sport, and sport is generally considered a lawful activity. The correct answer is C. Verify that participation in organized, sanctioned shooting competitions is a recognized lawful purpose under RSA 159, and that the applicant meets all other eligibility requirements for licensure. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the applicant's stated intent with the legal requirements for obtaining a pistol/revolver license in New Hampshire. The challenge lies in discerning whether the applicant's stated purpose for needing the license, while seemingly legitimate, aligns with the statutory definitions and spirit of New Hampshire law regarding firearm ownership for self-defense or sport. Misinterpreting or overlooking the nuances of the law could lead to the issuance of a license to an individual who may not meet the full legal criteria, or conversely, unjustly denying a license to a qualified applicant. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with RSA 159 and to uphold public safety. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough review of the applicant's stated purpose against the specific requirements outlined in New Hampshire Revised Statutes Annotated, RSA, Chapter 159, particularly concerning the lawful purposes for which a pistol or revolver license may be issued. This approach necessitates understanding that, while self-defense is a primary lawful purpose, the statute may also implicitly or explicitly permit licenses for other lawful purposes such as sport shooting or collecting, provided these activities do not contravene other laws. The licensing authority must verify that the applicant's stated intent is a recognized lawful purpose under New Hampshire law, and that the applicant meets all other eligibility criteria, such as age, residency, and absence of disqualifying criminal history. This ensures adherence to the legislative intent of RSA 159. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves automatically approving the license solely because the applicant states a desire for self-defense, without further inquiry or verification. This fails to acknowledge that RSA 159 may have specific criteria or limitations on what constitutes a lawful purpose, or may require demonstration of a genuine need beyond a general, unsubstantiated claim. It bypasses the due diligence required by the statute. Another incorrect approach is to deny the license simply because the applicant's stated purpose is not explicitly listed as self-defense in their application, even if the stated purpose is a recognized lawful activity under New Hampshire law, such as participation in competitive shooting events. This demonstrates a rigid and potentially overly narrow interpretation of the statute, failing to consider the full scope of lawful firearm use permitted in New Hampshire. A third incorrect approach is to approve the license based on the applicant's assurance that they will use the firearm responsibly, without independently verifying their eligibility against the statutory requirements of RSA 159. This abdicates the licensing authority's responsibility to ensure that all legal prerequisites for licensure are met, potentially compromising public safety by issuing a license without proper vetting. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role must adopt a systematic decision-making process. This begins with a comprehensive understanding of RSA Chapter 159 and any relevant administrative rules. When reviewing an application, the professional should first identify the applicant's stated purpose and then cross-reference this with the statutory definitions of lawful purposes for pistol/revolver licensure in New Hampshire. Any ambiguities or potential disqualifications must be investigated further through additional documentation or inquiry. The decision to approve or deny must be based on a clear alignment with all statutory requirements, ensuring both the applicant's rights and public safety are respected. This process emphasizes adherence to the letter and spirit of the law. Question 6. The risk matrix shows a moderate potential for misinterpretation of an applicant's stated intent for obtaining a pistol/revolver license in New Hampshire. An applicant who appears nervous but otherwise provides a complete application stating their purpose is personal protection, has a history of minor, non-violent municipal ordinance violations. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing authority in New Hampshire? Option A. Deny the license based on the applicant's nervousness and the presence of municipal ordinance violations, as these factors suggest a potential risk to public safety. Option B. Immediately approve the license, as the applicant's stated purpose of personal protection is a recognized lawful purpose under New Hampshire law, and their nervousness is not a disqualifying factor. Option C. Request additional, unrelated personal information from the applicant, such as their social media activity and detailed personal financial records, to further assess their suitability for a license. Option D. Conduct a thorough review of the applicant's entire application, cross-referencing their stated purpose of personal protection with the requirements and definitions of lawful purpose under New Hampshire Revised Statutes Annotated RSA 159, and investigate the nature of the municipal ordinance violations to determine if they impact eligibility under RSA 159. The correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough review of the applicant's entire application, cross-referencing their stated purpose of personal protection with the requirements and definitions of lawful purpose under New Hampshire Revised Statutes Annotated RSA 159, and investigate the nature of the municipal ordinance violations to determine if they impact eligibility under RSA 159. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the applicant's stated intent with the legal requirements for obtaining a pistol/revolver license in New Hampshire. The challenge lies in discerning whether the applicant's stated purpose for wanting a license, while seemingly benign, could potentially be interpreted as a pretext for activities that are not aligned with the spirit or letter of New Hampshire's firearm licensing laws, which prioritize lawful purposes and public safety. Careful judgment is required to avoid both unwarranted denial of a legitimate right and the potential enablement of unsafe or unlawful firearm possession. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough review of the applicant's stated purpose in conjunction with all other submitted documentation, and a clear understanding of New Hampshire Revised Statutes Annotated, RSA 159, particularly concerning the lawful purposes for carrying a pistol or revolver. This approach requires verifying that the applicant's stated reason for seeking a license, such as self-defense or sport shooting, aligns with the statutory definitions of lawful use, and that no disqualifying factors are present. The justification for this approach is rooted in RSA 159(6), which outlines the requirements for obtaining a license to carry a pistol or revolver, emphasizing that the applicant must demonstrate a lawful purpose and be of good character. A comprehensive review ensures compliance with the statute's intent to permit responsible firearm ownership for legitimate reasons while safeguarding public safety. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves accepting the applicant's stated purpose at face value without further inquiry or verification, even if other aspects of the application raise minor concerns. This fails to meet the professional obligation to conduct due diligence as mandated by RSA 159. It risks overlooking potential red flags that, while not immediately disqualifying, might warrant further investigation to ensure the applicant is not misrepresenting their intentions or posing a risk. Another incorrect approach is to deny the license solely based on a subjective interpretation of the applicant's demeanor or perceived nervousness, without concrete evidence of a disqualifying factor or a lack of lawful purpose, as defined by RSA 159. This approach is ethically problematic as it relies on personal bias rather than objective legal criteria, potentially infringing upon an individual's rights without due process. A third incorrect approach is to focus excessively on minor, unrelated details in the application that do not pertain to the applicant's eligibility under RSA 159, such as their employment history unrelated to firearm use or personal hobbies that do not impact their ability to lawfully possess a firearm. This distracts from the core requirements of the statute and can lead to an inefficient and potentially unfair assessment process. Professional reasoning. Professionals tasked with reviewing firearm license applications in New Hampshire should employ a systematic and objective decision-making framework. This framework begins with a comprehensive understanding of RSA 159 and its specific requirements for lawful purpose and applicant eligibility. The process should involve a meticulous review of all submitted documentation, cross-referencing information to identify any inconsistencies or potential concerns. When ambiguities or minor issues arise, professionals should follow established protocols for seeking clarification or conducting further legally permissible investigations. The ultimate decision must be based on whether the applicant meets all statutory requirements, with a clear and documented rationale that adheres to both the letter and the spirit of New Hampshire law, prioritizing public safety and the rights of law-abiding citizens. Question 7. Operational review demonstrates that a New Hampshire resident is considering carrying a pistol openly while walking through a public park. The resident possesses the pistol legally in their home, but has not obtained a pistol/revolver license. Considering New Hampshire's firearm regulations, what is the most legally sound course of action regarding carrying the pistol in the public park? Option A. Assume that open carry is permitted in all public spaces in New Hampshire, and therefore, carrying the pistol openly in the park is acceptable as long as it is not brandished or used aggressively. Option B. Recognize that carrying a pistol openly in a public park in New Hampshire without a license is generally not permitted under RSA 159(4), and therefore, the resident should not carry the pistol in the park without first obtaining a license or confirming a specific exemption applies. Option C. Carry the pistol openly in the park, as possession of the pistol is legal in the home, and this extends to any public area as long as the firearm is not actively being used to threaten someone. Option D. Carry the pistol concealed in the park, believing that concealed carry is less regulated than open carry and therefore permissible without a license. The correct answer is B. Recognize that carrying a pistol openly in a public park in New Hampshire without a license is generally not permitted under RSA 159(4), and therefore, the resident should not carry the pistol in the park without first obtaining a license or confirming a specific exemption applies. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to navigate the nuances of New Hampshire's firearm laws, specifically concerning the permissible use of a pistol or revolver outside of self-defense scenarios, while also considering the ethical implications of responsible firearm ownership. The challenge lies in understanding the scope of lawful carry and the potential for misuse or misunderstanding of legal provisions, which could lead to unintended legal consequences. Careful judgment is required to ensure all actions are compliant with New Hampshire statutes and promote public safety. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves understanding that New Hampshire law, RSA 159(4), generally permits the carrying of a pistol or revolver without a license if it is kept in the person's home, in their place of business, or on land owned or possessed by them. However, when carrying such a firearm outside of these specific locations, a license is typically required, with exceptions for carrying directly to or from a place of worship, a target range, or a gunsmith. Therefore, the correct approach is to recognize that carrying a pistol openly or concealed in a public park in New Hampshire, without a specific exemption or a valid license, would likely be a violation of RSA 159(4). This approach prioritizes adherence to the specific statutory language and its limitations on carrying firearms in public spaces. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves assuming that any possession of a pistol or revolver outside the home is permissible as long as it is not being used in a threatening manner. This fails to acknowledge the specific statutory requirements for carrying firearms in public places in New Hampshire, which necessitate a license or a direct exemption. Another incorrect approach is to believe that open carry is inherently legal in all public spaces in New Hampshire without any restrictions. This overlooks the fact that, while New Hampshire is an open carry state, this right is still subject to statutory limitations, particularly concerning carrying firearms in areas like public parks where specific regulations may apply, or a license might be implicitly required for general public carry. A third incorrect approach is to assume that a pistol or revolver can be carried concealed in any public area without a license, simply because the firearm is not visible. This directly contradicts the licensing requirements for concealed carry under New Hampshire law. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the relevant statutes, such as RSA 159(4) in New Hampshire. This involves consulting official legal resources and understanding the specific definitions and limitations provided within the law. When faced with a scenario involving firearm possession in public, the professional should ask, does this situation fall under a specific statutory exemption for carrying without a license? If not, the next question is a license required for this type of carry, open or concealed, in this specific location? This systematic approach ensures that actions are grounded in legal compliance and responsible firearm handling, prioritizing safety and adherence to the law. Question 8. Quality control measures reveal that a New Hampshire resident's legally owned pistol, stored in a standard gun safe, may be accessible to individuals who pose a potential risk to themselves or others. What is the most responsible and legally compliant course of action for the owner to take under New Hampshire law? Option A. Continue to store the firearm in the standard gun safe, assuming this fulfills all legal obligations for responsible storage in New Hampshire. Option B. Lend the firearm to a trusted friend who is also a licensed firearm owner in New Hampshire, without further formal procedures. Option C. Immediately secure the firearm in a manner that prevents unauthorized access and consult with the New Hampshire State Police or a qualified legal professional specializing in firearm law. Option D. Ignore the concern, believing it to be a personal matter and not a legal or safety issue requiring further action under New Hampshire law. Correct answer is C. Immediately secure the firearm in a manner that prevents unauthorized access and consult with the New Hampshire State Police or a qualified legal professional specializing in firearm law. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to balance the legal requirements for firearm possession with the ethical responsibility to ensure public safety and avoid potential misuse of a firearm. The individual is aware of a potential risk associated with a firearm they own, and their judgment in handling this situation directly impacts their legal standing and the safety of others. Careful consideration of New Hampshire's firearm laws and responsible gun ownership principles is paramount. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves immediately securing the firearm in a manner that prevents unauthorized access, and then consulting with the New Hampshire State Police or a qualified legal professional specializing in firearm law. This approach is correct because it prioritizes safety by physically preventing access to the firearm, while simultaneously seeking expert guidance to ensure compliance with all applicable New Hampshire statutes regarding firearm possession, storage, and any reporting requirements that may arise from the specific circumstances. This proactive and informed strategy mitigates risk and upholds legal obligations. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to simply store the firearm in a standard gun safe without taking any further action, assuming this fulfills all responsibilities. This is insufficient because it fails to address the specific concern that prompted the need for enhanced security, and does not involve seeking expert advice to determine if additional legal obligations exist under New Hampshire law, such as mandatory reporting or specific storage requirements related to the identified risk. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the concern and continue to store the firearm as usual, believing it is a personal matter. This is ethically and legally unacceptable, as it disregards the potential risk to others and may violate New Hampshire's duty of care principles related to firearm ownership. Furthermore, attempting to resolve the situation by lending the firearm to a friend without proper legal transfer or background checks would be a severe violation of New Hampshire firearm laws and a significant safety risk. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing similar situations should first assess the immediate safety risk. If a risk is identified, the firearm should be secured to prevent access. The next critical step is to consult authoritative sources, such as law enforcement agencies or legal counsel specializing in firearm law within the relevant jurisdiction, New Hampshire in this case. This ensures that actions taken are not only safe, but also fully compliant with all state and federal regulations. A decision-making framework should involve 1. Immediate risk mitigation, 2. Information gathering regarding legal obligations, 3. Seeking expert advice, and 4. Implementing a legally compliant and safe solution. Question 9. Risk assessment procedures indicate that an applicant for a New Hampshire pistol/revolver license has a past arrest for a misdemeanor offense, for which the charges were subsequently dismissed. The application form asks about any arrests or legal entanglements. Which of the following approaches best aligns with New Hampshire's regulatory framework and ethical firearm ownership principles? Option A. Submit the application and state that there have been no arrests or legal entanglements. Option B. Submit the application without mentioning the arrest, assuming that since the charges were dismissed, it is not relevant. Option C. Contact the New Hampshire State Police for guidance, but then submit the application omitting the arrest without their explicit instruction to do so. Option D. Fully disclose the arrest and the fact that the charges were dismissed on the application. The correct answer is D. Fully disclose the arrest and the fact that the charges were dismissed on the application. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance the legal requirements for obtaining a New Hampshire pistol/revolver license with the ethical considerations of responsible firearm ownership and the potential impact on public safety. The applicant's past behavior, even if not resulting in a disqualifying conviction, raises concerns that must be addressed through a thorough and honest application process. Misrepresenting information or failing to disclose relevant details can have serious legal and ethical consequences. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a complete and truthful disclosure of all requested information on the New Hampshire pistol/revolver license application. This means accurately reporting the arrest and subsequent dismissal of charges, as this is a factual event that the licensing authority is entitled to know. New Hampshire law, as outlined in RSA 159, governs the issuance of pistol and revolver licenses, and requires applicants to provide truthful information. Failing to disclose a past arrest, even if the charges were dropped, could be considered a misrepresentation on the application, potentially leading to denial or revocation of the license. Ethical firearm ownership dictates transparency and adherence to all legal requirements. Incorrect approach is analysis, submitting the application without mentioning the arrest, assuming that because the charges were dismissed it is not relevant, is a regulatory failure. While the charges did not result in a conviction, the arrest itself is a matter of public record, and a fact that the licensing authority has a right to consider in their assessment of an applicant's suitability. Omitting this information is a direct violation of the requirement for truthful disclosure on the application. Submitting the application and stating that there have been no arrests or legal entanglements, despite the prior arrest, is a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This constitutes a direct misrepresentation of facts on a legal document. New Hampshire law requires applicants to be truthful, and knowingly providing false information on a license application is a serious offense that can lead to criminal penalties and permanent disqualification from obtaining a firearm license. Contacting the New Hampshire State Police to inquire about the necessity of disclosing the arrest, but proceeding with the application without their explicit guidance, and then omitting the arrest is also an inadequate approach. While initiating contact shows some awareness, failing to follow through with their advice or obtain clear confirmation before submitting an incomplete application is a failure to meet the full disclosure requirements. The responsibility lies with the applicant to ensure all information is provided as required by law. Professional reasoning. Professionals seeking a New Hampshire pistol/revolver license should approach the application process with a commitment to absolute transparency. The decision-making framework should prioritize understanding the specific requirements of RSA 159, which mandates truthful and complete disclosure. When in doubt about what information to include, it is always best to err on the side of disclosure and seek clarification from the issuing authority rather than risk misrepresentation. Ethical considerations demand honesty, and legal compliance requires adherence to all application stipulations. Question 10. Benchmark analysis indicates that a New Hampshire resident applying for a pistol/revolver license must account for several enumerated costs. If the application fee is $10, the fingerprinting fee is $25, the background check fee is $15, and New Hampshire imposes a 25% sales tax on the total of these fees. What is the total cost to the applicant? Option A, $59.00. Option B, $55.94. Option C, $52.50. Option D, $55.63. Correct answer is B, $55.94. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge by requiring the applicant to accurately calculate the total cost of firearm acquisition, including all mandatory fees and taxes, within the specific regulatory framework of New Hampshire for pistol/revolver licensing. Miscalculation can lead to financial discrepancies, potential legal issues with the licensing authority, and an incomplete understanding of the financial commitment involved in obtaining a license. Careful judgment is required to ensure all applicable costs are identified and correctly computed. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves systematically identifying all listed fees and taxes, converting them to their numerical values, and summing them precisely. This method directly addresses the question by ensuring every component of the licensing cost is accounted for, leading to the accurate total. This aligns with the principle of due diligence and adherence to the financial requirements stipulated by New Hampshire law for firearm licensing. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach might involve omitting a specific fee, such as the background check fee, from the calculation. This is a regulatory failure because the background check is a mandatory component of the licensing process in New Hampshire, and its associated cost must be included. Another incorrect approach could be to incorrectly apply the sales tax rate, perhaps by using a general state sales tax rate instead of the specific rate applicable to firearm-related transactions, or by misinterpreting how the tax is applied to the sum of fees. This represents a failure to adhere to the precise financial regulations governing the licensing process. A third incorrect approach might be to round intermediate calculations prematurely, leading to a final answer that deviates from the exact required sum, demonstrating a lack of precision in financial management. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such calculations by first thoroughly reviewing all provided fee structures and tax regulations specific to New Hampshire firearm licensing. They should then create a clear, step-by-step calculation process, ensuring each component is accounted for and that intermediate results are maintained with sufficient precision before the final summation. This methodical approach minimizes the risk of error and ensures compliance with all legal and financial obligations. Question 11. Governance review demonstrates that a New Hampshire resident who holds a valid pistol/revolver license wishes to dispose of a handgun they no longer possess. Considering New Hampshire's regulatory framework for firearm ownership and transfer, which of the following actions represents the most legally sound and professionally responsible method for the licensee to proceed? Option A. Gift the handgun directly to a trusted friend who also resides in New Hampshire and possesses a pistol/revolver license. Option B. Leave the handgun at a friend's residence for safekeeping with the understanding that it will be retrieved at a later date. Option C. Engage a federally licensed firearms dealer, FFL, in New Hampshire to facilitate the sale or transfer of the handgun. Option D. Sell the handgun directly to another individual at a local gun show without involving a licensed dealer. Correct answer is C. Engage a federally licensed firearms dealer, FFL, in New Hampshire to facilitate the sale or transfer of the handgun. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent responsibility of firearm ownership and the legal obligations associated with it in New Hampshire. A licensee must not only understand the physical aspects of firearm safety, but also the legal framework governing possession and transfer. The core of the challenge lies in balancing personal convenience with strict adherence to New Hampshire statutes regarding firearm disposition. Careful judgment is required to avoid actions that could inadvertently lead to illegal possession or transfer, potentially resulting in severe legal consequences. The best professional approach involves a proactive and legally compliant method of firearm disposition. This entails understanding that a pistol or revolver license in New Hampshire does not grant the holder the authority to bypass established legal channels for transferring ownership. The most appropriate action is to engage a licensed firearms dealer, FFL, to facilitate the sale or transfer. This ensures that the transaction is conducted in accordance with federal and New Hampshire laws, including any required background checks and record keeping. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and responsible firearm stewardship, aligning with the intent of licensing and firearm transfer regulations. An incorrect approach would be to simply give the firearm to a friend who is also a New Hampshire resident and holds a pistol/revolver license. While the friend may be legally permitted to own a firearm, the act of gifting or selling a handgun without involving a licensed dealer can be construed as an illegal straw purchase or an unregistered transfer, depending on the specific circumstances and intent. New Hampshire law, like federal law, generally requires licensed dealers to conduct background checks for firearm sales. Circumventing this process, even between licensed individuals, can create legal liabilities for both parties and undermines the regulatory framework designed to prevent firearms from falling into prohibited hands. Another incorrect approach is to sell the firearm directly to an individual at a gun show without any formal process. While private sales of long guns may have different regulations in some jurisdictions, handguns typically have stricter requirements. In New Hampshire, even private sales of handguns may be subject to background check requirements, and failing to adhere to these can lead to legal repercussions. The absence of an FFL in such a transaction means that the mandatory checks and record keeping are bypassed, creating a significant legal risk. Finally, storing the firearm indefinitely at a friend's residence with the intention of retrieving it later is also an improper approach. This essentially constitutes an illegal transfer of possession, even if ownership is not formally transferred. The firearm is no longer under the direct control and legal responsibility of the licensed owner, and its presence at another location without proper legal documentation or transfer can lead to complications and potential legal issues if the firearm is involved in any incident. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance above all else when dealing with firearm disposition. This involves consulting relevant New Hampshire statutes, and if unsure, seeking advice from a licensed firearms dealer or legal counsel. The principle of, when in doubt, err on the side of caution and legality is paramount. Understanding that a pistol/revolver license is for personal possession and carry, not for facilitating unregulated firearm transfers, is crucial. Question 12. Cost-benefit analysis shows that purchasing a high-security gun safe for a newly acquired handgun in New Hampshire might seem expensive, but what is the most prudent and legally compliant course of action for a licensed owner to ensure responsible storage and prevent unauthorized access? Option A. Place the handgun in a secure location in the home, such as a locked cabinet, but do not use any additional locking mechanisms on the firearm itself. Option B. Keep the handgun in a bedside table drawer, as it is readily accessible for self-defense and unlikely to be accessed by others. Option C. Store the handgun unloaded in a locked gun case, but leave the gun case in an unlocked vehicle parked in the driveway overnight. Option D. Utilize a robust trigger lock and store the handgun in a locked case within a closet, ensuring the closet door is also locked. The correct answer is D. Utilize a robust trigger lock and store the handgun in a locked case within a closet, ensuring the closet door is also locked. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing personal responsibility for firearm safety with the potential for unintended consequences that could impact others. The core of the challenge lies in adhering to New Hampshire's laws regarding firearm possession and storage, while also exercising sound judgment to prevent unauthorized access. Careful consideration is required to ensure compliance with RSA 159, which governs firearms in New Hampshire, particularly concerning safe storage and preventing access by prohibited individuals. The best approach involves proactively taking all reasonable steps to secure the firearm in a manner that prevents unauthorized access, even when the firearm is not in immediate use. This includes utilizing a locking device that renders the firearm inoperable and inaccessible to anyone other than the licensed owner. This aligns with the spirit of responsible gun ownership and the legal requirements in New Hampshire to prevent harm. By employing a secure locking mechanism, the individual demonstrates a commitment to safety and compliance with the intent of firearm regulations, which aim to reduce the risk of accidents, theft, and misuse. An approach that involves leaving the firearm in a location that is accessible to others, even if the individual believes it is unlikely to be accessed, fails to meet the standard of reasonable care. This could be interpreted as a violation of the implicit duty of care associated with firearm ownership, and could potentially lead to liability if the firearm is misused by an unauthorized person. Furthermore, storing the firearm in a manner that does not actively prevent unauthorized use, such as simply placing it in a drawer or on a shelf, does not fulfill the obligation to secure the weapon. Relying solely on the assumption that no one will attempt to access the firearm is a flawed judgment that disregards the inherent risks associated with unsecured firearms. Professionals should approach situations involving firearm possession by first understanding their specific legal obligations under New Hampshire law, including RSA 159. This involves not only possessing a valid license, but also understanding the responsibilities related to safe storage and preventing unauthorized access. A prudent decision-making process would involve assessing potential risks, considering the most secure storage options available, and prioritizing the safety of oneself and others. When in doubt, erring on the side of greater security is always the professionally responsible choice. Question 13. Implementation of a pistol or revolver license application process in New Hampshire requires a specific set of actions to ensure legal compliance. A resident, having heard various methods from acquaintances, is considering the most effective and legally sound way to obtain their license. Which of the following represents the most appropriate and legally compliant pathway for a New Hampshire resident to secure a pistol or revolver license? Option A. Obtaining a pistol permit from a neighboring state and assuming it is automatically valid for carrying a pistol or revolver in New Hampshire without further verification or application. Option B. Successfully completing a firearms safety course approved by a qualified New Hampshire instructor, demonstrating proficiency in safe handling and use, and submitting a complete application with all required documentation to the local law enforcement agency or the New Hampshire State Police. Option C. Relying on advice from friends and online forums regarding firearm safety and application procedures, assuming that general knowledge of firearm ownership is sufficient for licensing. Option D. Submitting an application with information that is partially accurate, believing that minor inaccuracies will not affect the licensing process in New Hampshire. The correct answer is B. Successfully completing a firearm safety course approved by a qualified New Hampshire instructor, demonstrating proficiency in safe handling and use, and submitting a complete application with all required documentation to the local law enforcement agency or the New Hampshire State Police. Explanation: the scenario presents a challenge for New Hampshire residents seeking to legally carry a pistol or revolver. The core professional challenge lies in navigating the specific requirements of New Hampshire law for obtaining a permit, ensuring compliance with all statutory obligations to avoid legal repercussions, and maintain the privilege of carrying a firearm. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between legitimate avenues for obtaining a permit and those that might be misconstrued or fall short of legal standards. The best approach involves a thorough understanding and direct application of New Hampshire's statutory framework for pistol and revolver licensing. This means diligently completing the required training as mandated by RSA 159(4), which specifies the necessity of a certificate from a qualified instructor demonstrating proficiency in the safe handling and use of a pistol or revolver. Furthermore, it requires submitting a complete and accurate application to the appropriate local law enforcement agency or the New Hampshire State Police, as outlined in RSA 159(6), and undergoing any necessary background checks. This direct adherence to statutory mandates ensures the applicant meets all legal prerequisites for obtaining a license, thereby upholding the law and demonstrating responsible firearm ownership. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on informal advice from friends or online forums without verifying it against New Hampshire statutes. This fails to meet the explicit training requirements of RSA 159(4) and bypasses the formal application and background check process mandated by RSA 159(6). Such an approach risks significant legal penalties, including fines and potential imprisonment, for carrying a firearm without a valid license. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that a permit from another state automatically grants reciprocity in New Hampshire without confirming the specific interjurisdictional agreements and New Hampshire's recognition of such permits. While New Hampshire does have reciprocity agreements, the process and specific requirements for recognizing out-of-state permits are governed by RSA 159(6)(a), and failing to follow these specific provisions would render the carry illegal. A third incorrect approach would be to obtain a permit based on incomplete or falsified information on the application. This directly violates the integrity of the application process mandated by RSA 159(6) and could lead to the revocation of any issued permit, in addition to criminal charges for fraud or misrepresentation. Professional reasoning in such situations requires a commitment to statutory compliance. Professionals should always consult the official New Hampshire Revised Statutes Annotated, RSA, concerning firearms and licensing. When in doubt, seeking clarification from the issuing law enforcement agency or legal counsel specializing in New Hampshire firearms law is paramount. The decision-making process should prioritize accuracy, completeness, and adherence to the letter and spirit of the law. Question 14. To address the challenge of ensuring lawful firearm possession and carry in New Hampshire, what is the most prudent course of action for an individual seeking to carry a pistol or revolver? Option A. Assume that a previous firearm training course completed years ago is sufficient and that no further verification of licensing or current regulations is necessary for carrying a pistol or revolver in New Hampshire. Option B. Rely on advice from friends or online forums regarding the legality of carrying a firearm in New Hampshire, assuming common practices are legally permissible. Option C. Carry a pistol or revolver openly or concealed, believing that ownership of the firearm inherently grants the right to carry it without further licensing or adherence to specific regulations. Option D. Diligently study the New Hampshire Revised Statutes Annotated, RSA, Chapter 159, focusing on the specific requirements for obtaining and maintaining a pistol or revolver license, and consult official guidance from the New Hampshire State Police. The correct answer is D. Diligently study the New Hampshire Revised Statutes Annotated, RSA, Chapter 159, focusing on the specific requirements for obtaining and maintaining a pistol or revolver license, and consult official guidance from the New Hampshire State Police. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to navigate the nuances of New Hampshire's firearm laws, specifically concerning the legal carrying of a pistol or revolver, while also considering the ethical implications of personal responsibility and public safety. The challenge lies in accurately interpreting and applying the relevant statutes to a given situation, ensuring compliance with the law, and upholding the principles of responsible gun ownership. Misinterpreting these laws can lead to serious legal consequences and compromise public trust. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a thorough understanding of New Hampshire Revised Statutes Annotated, RSA, Chapter 159, specifically focusing on the requirements for obtaining and maintaining a pistol or revolver license. This includes understanding the eligibility criteria, the application process, the training requirements, and the restrictions on carrying. A professional would prioritize consulting the most current RSA provisions and any relevant administrative rules or guidance issued by the New Hampshire State Police to ensure their knowledge is up to date and accurate. This approach ensures that any action taken is in strict adherence to the legal framework governing firearm possession and carry in New Hampshire. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to rely solely on anecdotal information or outdated interpretations of firearm laws. This is professionally unacceptable because it bypasses the authoritative legal sources and can lead to significant legal violations. Another incorrect approach is to assume that possessing a firearm automatically grants the right to carry it openly or concealed without a proper license, disregarding the specific licensing requirements outlined in RSA 159. This demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of the law's intent, which is to regulate carry for public safety. Finally, an approach that prioritizes personal convenience over legal compliance, such as carrying a firearm without verifying the validity of one's license or understanding current carry restrictions, is also professionally unsound and legally perilous. Professional reasoning. Professionals faced with questions about firearm laws should adopt a systematic approach. First, identify the specific jurisdiction and the relevant statutes. Second, consult the official, most current legal texts and administrative guidance. Third, interpret these laws in their entirety, considering all applicable sections and any judicial interpretations. Fourth, if there is any ambiguity, seek clarification from official sources or legal counsel. This methodical process ensures accuracy, compliance, and responsible conduct. Question 15. The review process indicates an applicant for a New Hampshire pistol/revolver license has a prior misdemeanor conviction for simple assault. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing authority to determine the applicant's eligibility? Option A. Rely solely on the applicant's assertion that they are not prohibited from possessing a firearm, without independent verification or legal interpretation. Option B. Grant the license based on the applicant's statement that the conviction was minor and occurred many years ago, without further legal review. Option C. Automatically deny the application, assuming that any misdemeanor conviction prohibits firearm possession in New Hampshire. Option D. Conduct a detailed legal analysis of RSA 159.3, specifically examining how a misdemeanor conviction for simple assault is classified, and whether it constitutes a disqualifying offense under New Hampshire law, consulting any relevant administrative guidance or case law. Correct answer is D. Conduct a detailed legal analysis of RSA 159.3, specifically examining how a misdemeanor conviction for simple assault is classified, and whether it constitutes a disqualifying offense under New Hampshire law, consulting any relevant administrative guidance or case law. Explanation. The review process indicates a scenario where an applicant for a New Hampshire pistol/revolver license has a prior misdemeanor conviction for simple assault. This presents a professional challenge because the applicant's eligibility hinges on a nuanced interpretation of New Hampshire law regarding firearm possession by individuals with certain criminal histories. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with RSA 159.3, which governs who is prohibited from possessing firearms. The best professional approach involves a thorough review of the specific statute and any relevant case law or administrative guidance from the New Hampshire State Police or Attorney General's office concerning misdemeanor assault convictions and firearm eligibility. This approach directly addresses the legal requirements by determining if the specific misdemeanor assault conviction disqualifies the applicant under RSA 159(3). This is correct because it prioritizes accurate legal interpretation and adherence to the explicit prohibitions outlined in New Hampshire law, ensuring a fair and lawful decision. An incorrect approach would be to assume that any misdemeanor conviction automatically disqualifies an applicant. This is professionally unacceptable because New Hampshire law, like many jurisdictions, often distinguishes between different types of misdemeanors and their impact on firearm rights. Failing to investigate the specifics of the conviction and its classification under RSA 159(3) could lead to an erroneous denial, potentially violating the applicant's rights. Another incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the applicant's self-reporting without independent verification or legal analysis. This is professionally unacceptable, as it bypasses the due diligence required by the licensing authority. The licensing body has a responsibility to ensure public safety and enforce the law, which necessitates an independent assessment of eligibility based on official records and legal statutes. A third incorrect approach would be to grant the license based on the applicant's perceived good character or the passage of time since the conviction, without a definitive legal determination of eligibility under RSA 159(3). This is professionally unacceptable because it substitutes subjective judgment for objective legal standards. The licensing process is governed by statute, not by personal opinions or assumptions about rehabilitation. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve 1. Identifying the specific statutory provisions governing eligibility. 2. Conducting thorough research into the nuances of those provisions, including any relevant case law or administrative interpretations. 3. Verifying all applicant information through official channels. 4. Applying the law objectively to the facts of the case. 5. Documenting the decision-making process and the legal basis for the outcome. Question 16. Examination of the data shows that an applicant for a New Hampshire pistol/revolver license has a past arrest that did not result in a conviction. The applicant believes this event is minor and was resolved favorably, and therefore considers it irrelevant to their current application. What is the most appropriate course of action for this applicant regarding the disclosure of this information on their New Hampshire pistol/revolver license application? Option A. Only disclose the arrest if specifically asked about arrests, not just convictions on the application. Option B. Omit the information about the arrest, assuming that only convictions are relevant for licensing purposes. Option C. Fully and accurately disclose the arrest and its outcome on the application, as required by New Hampshire law for background checks. Option D. Provide a brief, vague mention of a past legal issue without detailing the arrest, hoping it will suffice. The correct answer is C. Fully and accurately disclose the arrest and its outcome on the application, as required by New Hampshire law for background checks. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to navigate the specific requirements for obtaining a pistol/revolver license in New Hampshire, while also considering the ethical implications of providing incomplete or misleading information. The applicant's attempt to omit relevant details about a past legal issue, even if they believe it is minor or resolved, directly impacts the licensing authority's ability to conduct a thorough background check, which is a cornerstone of firearm safety regulations in New Hampshire. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with the law and to uphold the integrity of the licensing process. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice is to fully and accurately disclose all requested information on the New Hampshire pistol/revolver license application, including any past legal encounters, regardless of how minor the applicant perceives them to be. This approach is correct because New Hampshire RSA 159(4) outlines the requirements for obtaining a pistol/revolver license, which includes a background check. The application process is designed to gather all necessary information for this check. Providing complete and truthful information ensures compliance with New Hampshire law and demonstrates the applicant's understanding of their responsibility in the licensing process. It avoids any potential misrepresentation or omission that could lead to the denial of the license or future legal repercussions. Incorrect approaches analysis. Submitting an application that omits information about a past arrest, even if it did not result in a conviction, is a regulatory failure. New Hampshire law requires disclosure of such events as part of the background investigation. Failing to do so constitutes a misrepresentation on the application, which can lead to immediate denial of the license and potential penalties. Another incorrect approach is to assume that because the arrest did not lead to a conviction, it is not relevant. The licensing authority has the discretion to review all past interactions with law enforcement to assess an applicant's suitability. Furthermore, attempting to interpret the application questions to exclude relevant information is a violation of the spirit and letter of the law, which demands full transparency. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach any licensing application with a commitment to absolute honesty and completeness. The decision-making process should involve carefully reading all questions, understanding the intent behind them, and erring on the side of providing more information rather than less. If there is any doubt about whether a piece of information is relevant, it should be disclosed. This proactive approach minimizes the risk of regulatory noncompliance and ethical breaches, ensuring that the applicant meets all legal requirements and demonstrates responsible conduct. Question 17. Upon reviewing the requirements for a pistol/revolver license in New Hampshire, an applicant intends to carry a handgun for self-defense. However, they are considering stating the firearm's purpose as sporting activities on the application to potentially expedite the process or avoid scrutiny. What is the most appropriate course of action for this applicant in New Hampshire? Option A. Omit the intended use entirely from the application, assuming it is not a critical detail. Option B. Claim the firearm is for sporting activities to potentially expedite the application process. Option C. State the firearm is for collection purposes as a broader category that might encompass personal protection. Option D. Accurately state the intended use as personal protection on the application, aligning with the statutory purpose of the license in New Hampshire. The correct answer is D. Accurately state the intended use as personal protection on the application, aligning with the statutory purpose of the license in New Hampshire. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant to navigate the nuances of New Hampshire's firearm laws, specifically concerning the definition of personal protection and the proper documentation for a pistol/revolver license. Misinterpreting these requirements can lead to denial of the license, potential legal repercussions, and a misunderstanding of one's rights and responsibilities as a firearm owner in New Hampshire. Careful judgment is required to ensure all legal prerequisites are met accurately and honestly. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves accurately and truthfully representing the intended use of the firearm for personal protection when applying for a pistol/revolver license in New Hampshire. This means understanding that the license is specifically for carrying a pistol or revolver for the purpose of self-defense. The applicant must be prepared to demonstrate this intent and provide any required documentation that supports this claim, as stipulated by New Hampshire RSA 159. This approach aligns directly with the statutory purpose of the license and ensures compliance with the state's regulations. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to claim the firearm is for sporting purposes or collection when the true intent is personal protection. This misrepresentation is a direct violation of New Hampshire law, as the pistol/revolver license is specifically for carrying a pistol or revolver for personal protection. Providing false information on a license application is a serious offense and can lead to the denial of the license and potentially criminal charges. Another incorrect approach is to assume that simply owning a pistol/revolver automatically qualifies one for a license, without understanding the specific requirements for demonstrating personal protection, as defined by New Hampshire statutes. Law requires more than mere ownership. It necessitates a clear intent, and often a demonstration of need or purpose that aligns with self-defense. Failing to meet these specific criteria, even with honest intent, will result in denial. A further incorrect approach is to submit an incomplete application, omitting details about the intended use or failing to provide supporting documentation if requested by the licensing authority. While not an outright lie, this lack of thoroughness can be interpreted as an inability or unwillingness to meet the legal requirements for a pistol/revolver license in New Hampshire, leading to its denial. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach firearm licensing applications with a commitment to transparency and accuracy. The decision-making process should involve thoroughly reviewing the specific statutes of New Hampshire, RSA 159, pertaining to pistol/revolver licenses. This includes understanding the definition of personal protection, within the context of the law, and ensuring all application details precisely reflect this intended use. If there is any ambiguity, seeking clarification from the relevant licensing authority or legal counsel is advisable before submitting the application. The paramount principle is adherence to the letter and spirit of the law. Question 18. When evaluating your eligibility for a pistol/revolver license in New Hampshire and considering your past interactions with law enforcement, which approach best ensures compliance with RSA 159 and demonstrates responsible conduct? Option A. Only disclose past legal interactions if specifically asked about them in detail on the application form. Option B. Assume that any past legal interactions that did not result in a conviction are not relevant and therefore do not need to be disclosed on the application. Option C. Rely on the assumption that minor infractions from many years ago will not be a factor in the licensing decision and therefore do not require disclosure. Option D. Proactively investigate and understand the details and outcomes of any past arrests, charges, or convictions, regardless of whether they resulted in a conviction, to accurately report them on the application. Correct answer is D. Proactively investigate and understand the details and outcomes of any past arrests, charges, or convictions, regardless of whether they resulted in a conviction, to accurately report them on the application. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant to demonstrate not only knowledge of New Hampshire's firearm laws, but also the ability to interpret and apply them in a practical, albeit hypothetical, context. The challenge lies in distinguishing between legally permissible actions and those that could lead to a denial of a pistol/revolver license, even if the applicant believes their intentions are benign. Careful judgment is required to ensure all actions align with the specific requirements of New Hampshire Revised Statutes annotated RSA 159. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough and honest self-assessment of any past interactions with law enforcement that might be relevant to the licensing process. This includes proactively gathering information about any arrests, charges, or convictions, regardless of whether they resulted in a conviction or were later dismissed. Understanding the specific details and outcomes of these events is crucial for accurately answering the licensing application questions. New Hampshire RSA 159(4) outlines the disqualifying factors for a pistol/revolver license, which includes certain criminal convictions and adjudications. By proactively investigating and understanding any past legal entanglements, an applicant can ensure they provide truthful and complete information on their application, thereby adhering to the spirit and letter of the law. This approach prioritizes transparency and compliance with the licensing authority's requirements. Incorrect approaches analysis. Failing to investigate past legal interactions, assuming they are not relevant or will be forgotten, is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. The licensing authority in New Hampshire has the right to investigate an applicant's background, and any undisclosed or misrepresented information can lead to an outright denial of the license and potential penalties. This approach demonstrates a lack of diligence and a disregard for the application's integrity. Providing incomplete or misleading information on the application, even if not explicitly lying, is also a failure. The application is designed to elicit specific information to assess eligibility. Omitting relevant details, such as a dismissed charge or an arrest that did not lead to a conviction, can be interpreted as an attempt to conceal information that might be pertinent to the licensing decision. This undermines the trust between the applicant and the licensing authority. Relying solely on the assumption that minor infractions will not be considered is another flawed approach. New Hampshire RSA 159(4) does not always distinguish based on the severity of the offense when it comes to certain disqualifying factors. The licensing authority has the discretion to consider the totality of an applicant's history. Therefore, assuming minor issues are irrelevant is a misinterpretation of the licensing requirements and can lead to an inaccurate application. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach the pistol/revolver license application process in New Hampshire with a commitment to absolute honesty and thoroughness. The decision-making framework should involve 1. Understanding the specific requirements of RSA 159, particularly the disqualifying factors. 2. Conducting a comprehensive personal review of all past interactions with the legal system, including arrests, charges, and convictions, regardless of outcome. 3. consulting with legal counsel if there is any ambiguity about past events or their impact on licensing eligibility. 4. Providing complete and accurate information on the application, disclosing all relevant details as requested. This proactive and transparent approach ensures compliance and maximizes the likelihood of a successful application. Question 19. The analysis reveals that a New Hampshire resident who is legally permitted to own a pistol is considering how to store and transport it. Considering the specific regulations of New Hampshire, which of the following actions represents the most legally sound approach for possessing a pistol or revolver? Option A. Storing the pistol unloaded in a locked case within their own dwelling. Option B. Carrying the pistol openly, unloaded in a public park. Option C. Possessing an unloaded pistol in a school zone. Option D. Transporting a loaded pistol in their vehicle without a license. The correct answer is A. Storing the pistol unloaded in a locked case within their own dwelling. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to navigate the nuanced requirements of New Hampshire's firearm laws, specifically concerning the permissible locations for carrying a pistol or revolver. Misinterpreting these regulations can lead to serious legal consequences, including criminal charges and the revocation of any issued license. Therefore, a thorough understanding of the law and careful judgment are paramount. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive understanding of New Hampshire Revised Statutes Annotated, RSA 159, particularly RSA 159-4, which outlines the exceptions to the prohibition of carrying a pistol or revolver. This statute clearly permits carrying a pistol or revolver in one's dwelling, place of business, or on land possessed by the individual. Therefore, possessing a pistol or revolver within one's own home, provided it is unloaded and secured in a locked case, is a legally permissible action under New Hampshire law. This approach aligns with the statutory exceptions and demonstrates responsible firearm ownership. Incorrect approaches analysis. Carrying a pistol or revolver openly in a public park in New Hampshire, even if unloaded, is not explicitly permitted by RSA 159-4 and could be construed as a violation of RSA 159-4, which prohibits carrying a pistol or revolver in public places without a license, with limited exceptions. A license may permit carrying in certain public places. The scenario specifies a context where such permission is not automatically granted without further conditions or specific licensing. Transporting a loaded pistol or revolver in a vehicle without a valid New Hampshire pistol/revolver license is a direct violation of RSA 159-4, as it requires a license for carrying in a vehicle. Possessing a pistol or revolver in a school zone, regardless of whether it is loaded or unloaded, is a serious offense under federal law and potentially state law, and is not covered by the exceptions in RSA 159-4. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach firearm possession and transport by first consulting the specific statutes of New Hampshire, particularly RSA Chapter 159. They should prioritize understanding the explicit exceptions and prohibitions outlined in the law. When in doubt about the legality of a particular action, seeking clarification from legal counsel or relevant law enforcement agencies is advisable. A proactive approach to understanding and adhering to all legal requirements is essential for responsible firearm ownership and to avoid legal entanglements. Question 20. Comparative studies suggest that the precise calculation of firearm safety course duration is critical for license eligibility. In New Hampshire, a certified pistol/revolver safety course requires a minimum of 6 hours of instruction, with specific modules including 2 hours for firearm safety principles, 5 hours for marksmanship fundamentals, 1 hour for New Hampshire firearm laws, and 5 hours for live fire training. If an instructor mistakenly calculates the total course time by averaging the time spent on each module, assuming this is acceptable, what would be the outcome of their calculation if they spent exactly the mandated time on each module? Option A. The total calculated time would be 6 hours, but this method is flawed as it averages individual module times. Option B. The total calculated time would be 6 hours, but this method is flawed as it excludes certain practical components from the total calculation. Option C. The total calculated time would be 6 hours, but this method is flawed as it rounds up the total time without verifying individual module compliance. Option D. The total calculated time would be 6 hours, accurately reflecting the sum of the mandated module durations. The correct answer is D. The total calculated time would be 6 hours, accurately reflecting the sum of the mandated module durations. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge related to the accurate calculation of firearm safety course completion times, which directly impacts the validity of a pistol/revolver license application in New Hampshire. Misinterpreting or miscalculating the required training duration can lead to an applicant being denied a license, or worse, a licensee operating under a false sense of compliance. The challenge lies in adhering strictly to the New Hampshire statutes regarding minimum training hours, ensuring no shortcuts are taken that would invalidate the course. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves meticulously calculating the total instructional time by summing the durations of each distinct training module, ensuring that each module meets or exceeds the minimum time requirements stipulated by New Hampshire law for a pistol/revolver safety course. This approach is correct because New Hampshire RSA 159, 4A mandates specific minimum training hours for firearm safety courses. Any calculation that accurately reflects the sum of these mandated hours, ensuring each component is met, demonstrates full compliance with the statutory requirements for a valid application. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves averaging the time spent across different modules, even if some modules fall short of the minimum required duration. This is incorrect because New Hampshire law specifies minimum hours for the overall course and often implies minimums for key components. Averaging can mask deficiencies in critical areas, leading to a course that does not meet the spirit or letter of the law, potentially rendering the applicant's training invalid. Another incorrect approach is to simply round up the total time to the nearest whole hour without verifying that each individual component of the training met its minimum required duration. This is incorrect because the law is concerned with the substance of the training, not just a superficial total. If a specific module, such as live fire practice, has a statutory minimum, simply rounding up the total time does not guarantee that this critical component was adequately covered. A further incorrect approach is to exclude certain practical or theoretical components from the total calculation, deeming them less important. This is incorrect because New Hampshire statutes define what constitutes a qualifying safety course, and all mandated components must be included in the total instructional time. Excluding any statutorily required element, regardless of perceived importance, would result in an incomplete training duration and a non-compliant application. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a systematic and detail-oriented approach. When calculating training hours, the primary framework should be the specific statutory requirements of New Hampshire RSA 159, 4A. This involves breaking down the course into its constituent parts, verifying the duration of each part against any specified minimums, and then summing these verified durations. If any doubt exists about the interpretation of the statute or the duration of a specific module, consulting the relevant New Hampshire statutes or seeking clarification from the licensing authority is paramount. The decision-making process should prioritize strict adherence to legal mandates over convenience or assumptions.